not one for excitement or drama. Just a little house, some plants I care for, and an old cat that prefers to stare out the window for hours. My days are filled with the hum of routine: coffee, laundry, cleaning, the occasional phone call with friends or family. And then there's James. James is my partner. He's always been more of the out there kind of person. Always working, always travelling. His work takes him to places I could never imagine. But it's okay, because truth be told, I enjoy the peace when he's gone. I've gotten used to being alone, or at least I thought I had. But it all started to change when we hired Lena. Lena is the kind of person you wouldn't give a second glance to. Polite, reserved, almost too quiet. She came into our lives a few months ago, helping with cleaning and a few odd jobs around the house. I never thought much about her. She just did her work and left. Nothing unusual, or so I thought. It was a night just like any other, when things started to feel off. James was away for one of his long business trips, and I was at home, sorting through emails and trying to keep busy. The house was eerily still. The only sound was the occasional creak of the floorboards or the wind tapping against the window. It was too quiet, and it was beginning to unsettle me. That's when Lena came over. She said she'd dropped by to check on the house. Something about making sure everything was in order. I didn't think much of it. She was always polite, always distant, but tonight there was something in her eyes, something different. I could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like an invisible fog. "How's everything?" Lena asked as she stepped inside, her voice soft, almost too soft. I smiled, offering a quick answer, but something in the back of my mind told me something wasn't right. The way she looked at me, it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why. It wasn't the way a housekeeper looks at her boss. It felt almost too personal. As we talked, I could feel a strange tension in the room, like a storm brewing just out of sight. Lena smiled, but there was something unsettling about it. Something that didn't sit right with me. I brushed it off, thinking I was just overthinking. But then, as she left, I noticed something I hadn't before. Her lingering glance, the way she paused before turning away, almost like she didn't want to leave. My heart raced for reasons I couldn't explain. It wasn't long before I realised that night would be the beginning of something I couldn't control. It started one evening when James was out of town. It was one of those days that felt like it would never end, full of errands, work, and a long meeting. When I got home, it was quiet, a little too quiet. It wasn't unusual for the house to be empty when James was away, but for some reason, that night felt different. I walked in and found Lena sitting in the kitchen, reading a book. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Long day?" she asked, her voice calm, like we were old friends. I nodded, dropping my keys on the counter. "Yeah, just a bit. How about you?" "I'm good," she said, and then we started talking. At first, it was just the usual small talk, but as the conversation went on, I realised how much we had in common. The same favourite books, the same dream of travelling to the same countries. It was easy to talk to her, and there was a comfort in that. For a moment, I didn't feel so alone. But then, something strange happened. Lena's gaze softened, she saw me in a way that no one else had in ages. I quickly brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. That night, though, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just a friendly conversation, nothing more. But deep down, I felt that something had shifted, and that made me nervous. A few days later, when James was still away, Lena stopped by to drop off some cleaning supplies. I invited her in, and we ended up sitting together in the kitchen again. This time, though, there was a difference in the air. It was like the room was charged with a quiet tension that wasn't there before. "Are you sure you're okay?" Lena asked, her voice soft, almost like she was worried. I smiled, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, just tired. James is still away." "That must be hard," she said, her words almost a whisper. I looked at her, and for a second, I wondered what was going on in her head. She kept talking, but I found myself distracted by how kind she was, how much she seemed to understand. I felt something stir inside me, but I didn't know what it was. It felt too easy to open up to her, too comfortable, and that made me nervous, because I had never been the type to share my feelings so openly. That night, when Lena left, I couldn't help but feel unsettled, like something had been said without words, like there was a connection between us that didn't make sense, and I hated that it bothered me so much. A few days later, I was sitting on the couch when the doorbell rang. It was Lena, standing there with a basket of fruit. "I thought I'd bring you this," she said, smiling. We exchanged a few polite words, but I could tell there was something more behind her smile. It wasn't just a friendly visit. There was something else in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I'm glad you stopped by," I said, trying to act normal, but my heart was pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed, that I couldn't go back to how things were. Just as we were talking, James came downstairs from his office. Lena quickly excused herself, and I felt a huge relief, but also a strange disappointment that I couldn't explain. Why did her leaving feel like something important had just slipped through my fingers? By the time James returned, everything had spiraled out of control. The house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I hadn't slept in days. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lena's face. Her eyes, empty and yet full of something I couldn't understand. A kind of darkness, a hunger, and I could feel it. Her presence, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. When James walked through the door, I rushed to him, desperate for some sense of normalcy. But he looked at me, and for the first time in all the years I'd known him, I saw something in his eyes that shook me to the core. Confusion, fear, but not fear of me, fear of something else, something I couldn't explain. "I saw her," I whispered, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Lena, she's not who we think she is." James's face went pale, his body going stiff. "What do you mean?" His voice was quiet, strained, like he already knew, like he was bracing for something he couldn't avoid. I told him everything. I told him about the strange behaviour, the whispers I heard in the dead of night when I was alone in the house, how Lena's smile had become twisted, as if it was a mask she couldn't quite hold up anymore, and how, each time I tried to escape her gaze, I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake told me I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. But when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. I've seen her too. My blood ran cold. I stared at him, frozen in disbelief. What do you mean? He looked over at me, his face drawn, pale. I don't think Lena is who she says she is. I think she's been watching us for a long time, Sophie. I think she's been planning something. A chill washed over me as I realised what he was hinting at. The strange things that had happened. The way Lena's presence had grown stronger and more suffocating. The feeling of being watched, even when no one was around. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. It was real. And just then, the doorbell rang. I didn't want to answer it. I didn't want to know who was standing on the other side, but I had no choice. As James and I walked toward the door, the house seemed to hold its breath. The silence was unbearable, and when I opened the door, Lena was standing there, her eyes darker than I had ever seen them. And that smile, oh, that smile, it was no longer friendly, no longer polite. It was the kind of smile you wear when you've already won. I'm so glad you two are home, she said, her voice sweet, but there was an edge to it. I've been waiting for you.